Hello, welcome back to another Sunday evening book club. We're so happy to be back with you. We have been enjoying some beautiful fall days here at school. This past week we had 4 wonderful grandparent luncheons. It was so great to see all of the grandparents here and the loved ones visiting and making all of those wonderful memories.
And I can still remember a special grandparents luncheon with my Grammy and Papa sitting outside on the playground having a lunch together. So those really are memories forever.
Yeah. So any grandparents that are out there or special loved ones that visited this past week, thank you so much for being here and helping to provide those memories for all of our kids. So we are back now. Mrs. Hendrickson read the first part of this book, so I'm going to let her give you a recap, and then I'll start with chapters 5, 6, and 7.
So when we first started reading Sleepy Hollow, we were introduced to the town and how it was a little strange town with some strange occurrences, things happening that maybe doesn't normally happen in towns. And we were introduced to Ichabod Crane. He's the local school teacher. And remember, he travels from house to house, living with the family of his students. And his obsession in his evenings was looking for the headless horseman. And I think we just finished up with Ichabod talking about how he's very interested in the headless horseman and how he's really going to start hunting to see if he could find him.
Ooh, all right, well, let's see what happens. All right, so chapter 5, Lazy Afternoons. Despite his terrifying walks home and the fitful nights, Ichabod went to every storytelling gathering he could. He could not help himself. He was as hungry for haunted tales as he was for food. He simply could not get enough. When he was in class with his students, his mind was firmly focused on teaching and keeping his students in line. He made sure his students worked hard and learned their subjects well. Once school let out, though, Ichabod's mind once again drifted to hauntings. He often spent the afternoon lying on a bed of clover, poring over Cotton Mather's History of New England Witchcraft. During the day, these tales did not frighten him very much. He could read the most gruesome tale, like the one about the farmer who had been shot in the stomach and now strode through his barn with blood and intestines oozing out of his middle, and not even a flinch. Now that would definitely make me flinch, for sure.
Me too.
But as he became more and more absorbed in the book he was reading, the afternoon always wore on. And, as it did every day, the sun would set and a quiet hush would settle over the forest. By the time Ichabod had closed his book and taken a good look around, the shadows were long. Dusk, that terrible in-between time when it was neither light nor dark, was upon him. Looking around warily, Ichabod would get up from his comfortable spot and pack up his bag. How did it get to be so late? He would wonder as he started down the trail to the farm where he happened to be lodged. As Ichabod made his way through Sleepy Hollow, the evening shadows always startled him. The snap of sticks under his feet raised the hair on the back of his neck. The occasional sound of a woodland creature, a moaning whippoorwill, a crying tree toad, or a screaming screech owl set poor Ichabod off the hard-to-see trail more than once. He often called out, "Who's there?" in distress. And when Ichabod had to walk under a thick canopy of trees or past the darkest swamp or bog, a firefly almost always streamed across his path. That was a sure sign of a witch's spell. During these terrifying trips to his temporary home, Ichabod had only one defense. Unlike on his silent walks home after a good ghost story gathering, Ichabod sang psalm tunes to drive away the evil spirits and spells. As he crept around each bush and tree, he belted out a solemn line from a favorite church song. As he moved from one song to another, his spirits lifted. Soon he almost forgot about the ghosts and witches of the world. His singing invariably got louder and more boisterous. His nasal voice carried over the farmlands, and in this way the good people of Tarrytown always knew that Ichabod Crane was passing by on his way home for the evening. There was one night, however, when Ichabod stopped singing in the middle of a psalm tune. The ground under his feet was vibrating, and the sound of a galloping horse echoed in the distance. Panicked, Ichabod started to run, but it was almost dark and the path was hard to see. Sweat trickled down his back as the sound of the hooves came nearer and nearer. Ichabod's breath caught in his throat. A horse was almost upon him. Ichabod rushed forward and tripped and fell on a tree root. He was sure he was done for, but a moment later the horse and rider raced right by him in a nearby field, disappearing into the darkening night. Still breathing heavily, Ichabod got up to his feet. He was sure he had barely escaped an encounter with the headless horseman. Chapter 6. Singing Lessons. While some farmers in the area did not think it was important that their children go to school, everyone agreed that it was a great honor to have a child in the church choir. As a result, Ichabod had a large gathering of students each week for his singing classes. Ichabod ran these singing lessons like he ran his regular schoolroom, strictly but fairly. If his students had a little talent, he did not punish them for being off-key, but he made them practice hard just the same. And if students had a natural gift, he never let them off easy, but demanded that they work equally hard at learning and performing the music. But in spite of his overall fairness, there was one singing student whom Ichabod could not seem to criticize, 18-year-old Katrina Van Tassel. Katrina was beautiful. She wore pure gold jewelry, which always looked lovely against her pale skin. Her fashionable clothes were beautiful, and she had a lovely singing voice. Katrina was sweet-tempered and friendly. She was also used to getting her way. She was an only child, and her parents spoiled her. She did not practice her songs as much as she should, and often did not pay attention in class. Instead, Katrina spent most of her class time flirting with the older boys. Still, Ichabod would not criticize her. He even became flustered when he was forced to interrupt her interruptions. This was very unusual behavior for the schoolmaster. It caused his other students to wonder why he let her get away with things. They talked about it in school, at home, and in church, and soon the people of Tarrytown suspected that Ichabod Crane was smitten with Katrina Van Tassel. Chapter 7. A Thriving Farm. One day, Ichabod had reason to meet with Katrina's father. Before this time, Ichabod had never been to the Van Tassel farm. It was in an out-of-the-way place, and Katrina was too old to be a school student of his. Ichabod expected the farm to be like the many others near Sleepy Hollow, comfortable and plain. So when he saw how huge and bountiful it was, his large green eyes nearly popped out of his head. Nestled in a fertile nook of land on the shores of the Hudson River, the Van Tassel farm was anything but plain. It was an estate. Fields of ripening crops spread in every direction: wheat, rye, buckwheat, and Indian corn. The trees in the orchards were heavy and ripened with apples, pears, and pomegranates. The barn was as big as a church, for Van Tassel had many animals. A troop of fat pigs paraded across their pen. Turkeys gobbled merrily in the courtyard. Guinea fowl shouted contentment with their strange cries, and in an adjoining pond swam ducks and a squadron of snowy geese. Every nesting bird in the area seemed to make it home in the rafters of the huge barn. If it wasn't snuggled in its nest, it was on the roof enjoying the warm sunshine. Not far from the barn, a clear freshwater spring bubbled up from the ground. The sweet water poured into a well made from a barrel, then spilled over and meandered through the grass to a neighboring brook. As Ichabod looked out over the vast farm, he was overcome by an intense hunger. He imagined all of the livestock and fowl cooked into delicious stews and roasts and gravies. He could smell the orchard fruit baked into perfect pies and cakes. He wanted to sit at Mr. Van Tassel's dinner table and eat until he was too full to move. The farmhouse itself was equally grand. The front porch held benches, tables, and a spinning wheel. Inside the front hall, ears of Indian corn and strings of dried apples and peaches were hung along the walls. A giant bag of wool from Van Tassel's sheep sat waiting to be spun into yarn. Another bag held coarse thread ready to be woven into clothing. Polished pewter platters, vases, and other dishes covered a long dresser. Through a slightly open door, Ichabod was able to peep into the beautiful parlor. Fancy wooden tables and claw-footed chairs were polished to a bright shine. Beautiful seashells decorated the fireplace, and a corner cupboard displayed numerous pieces of old silver and delicate china. Ichabod was beside himself. Never had he seen such wealth. The livestock, the crops, the furniture, the china. At that very moment, Ichabod was overtaken by greed. He wanted absolutely everything he saw to be his, including the one thing it would take to win it all, the hand of Van Tassel's lovely daughter, Katrina.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah, that was exciting.
What an estate.
I know, that's amazing. Right, well, thank you all for joining us again for our Sunday evening book club. We look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow and seeing all the amazing things the students are going to be doing next week. And then we will continue with the Legend of Sleepy Hollow and see if Ichabod ever is able to meet the Headless Horseman.
That's right.
See. All right, well, have a wonderful evening, and we will see all of you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.